What is going on with the world?
Why is everybody behaving like a maniac?
I'm so pissed off!
How have things descended so far and so fast? We never used to be this way. Well, fortunately for you and me, I've figured it all out. And it's actually very simple. To understand how people behave, you first need to understand the incentive. And actually, the incentive to behave the way people have been behaving is very strong. This is my flagship concept, virtuenomics. What is virtuenomics? Quite simply, it's the economy of virtue signaling. Where one can score virtue signaling points, VSPs, it is the economy of virtue signaling. But what is virtue signaling? Virtue signaling, quite simply, is when somebody desperately shows off that they have all of the right values and opinions, not mainly to help others, but simply to look good. The more virtue signaling they do, the more points they score, and the higher in rank they raise among their peers. Let's look at an example. A clear-cut example of virtue signaling of the highest order. King Charles, my king, he enjoys talking down to the peasants about climate change, about how to reduce their carbon footprint. Meanwhile, he'll think nothing about flying everywhere by private jet and having his Rolls-Royce transported in the process. And so here we have the ultimate virtue signal. He wants the benefits of the right opinion without any of the costs associated with it. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the heart of the problem of the modern world. But fortunately for all of us, I've come up with a way of measuring the virtue signalling point system through VSPs, virtue signalling points. How does one earn VSPs? Well, that depends on the virtue signalling intensity, which is split between levels 1 to 7. This particular VSP chart is for colonialism. There's lots of virtue signalling opportunities with that subject. So how does it work? It's very, very simple. In the virtue signalling point system, depending on where one sits on the virtue signal intensity, level 1 to 7, will determine how many points they earn. Now, how I actually calculate the points is something that I'll do in individual videos. It's not actually that important. What's important is how do we determine what level a person is on to then determine how many points they get to score. So let us begin then with the colonialism virtue signalling point system. Let us begin with level 1. Now, level 1 is actually a level that most of us are going to engage with at some point in time. Across the board, we all engage in a little bit of virtue signaling because sometimes it's just the appropriate thing to do. If you've just met somebody and you've fallen in love and you get invited round for dinner and you really want to impress her parents or his parents and a subject comes up and you don't agree with what's being said, actually the cordial and right thing to do is to just engage in a little level 1 virtue signaling. Now, in the case of colonialism, what is level 1 virtue signaling? Well, it's very simple. Colonialism happened. It's just an acknowledgement. It's low cost, low risk. There's dates, there's empires that existed, there's trade routes that existed, there's names of places that have been named because of people that colonized or conquered. Look at Jamestown in the United States, Virginia, I believe that was after the Virgin Queen. Colonialism is treated as a bounded historical phenomenon, one among many. There's no necessary moral identity required, but yeah, okay, colonialism, if you want to frame it that way, as this oppressive negative for the world, which it absolutely fucking was not, then you're going to engage in some level 1. Okay, level 2. What takes us from level 1 to level 2? Well, rather than just agreeing with the framework of colonialism as being a net negative, you actually proactively say out loud, not just that it happened, but colonialism caused harm. We bring the moral element into it. This is distinct from level 1 because at level 1, you're just saying that it happened and you're agreeing with the framework. Level 2, you're going a step further and you're propagating the idea that colonialism caused harm. The suffering is acknowledged. Violence and exploitation are foregrounded. It's still analytical, still comparative, still allows complexity and trade-offs, but the moral language enters. This is the key thing. But history remains history. So, okay, there's still an element of, okay, it happened. Yes, it was harmful. It was very violent and slavery and blah, 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 blah. But, in the context of history, it's just things that go on, things that happen. Okay, here we go then. We rise from level 2 to level 3. This now becomes part of your identity. You identify with the West is colonialism. Responsibility shifts from historical actors to modern populations, from systems to identities. So, in other words, colonialism becomes an inherited moral strain. Oh, but the plight of somebody that was born in the West that went around colonizing the world. You're no longer just studying history. You're implicated by proximity. It's actually your bloody fault and my fault. I'm a part of this. I was born into the British Empire. It's the worst one. Okay, level 3 to level 4. This is when people demand that you become obligated from a moral perspective. So in other words, if you try and be a level 1 among a level 4, actually neutrality is actually complicit here. Don't you realise actually that just by you not acknowledging that actually the West was actually a murderous colonizer that actually murdered millions of people? Actually, you're complicit in that murder? So that's what level 4 is. Your silence becomes an endorsement. Your disagreement becomes suspicion. You must acknowledge the guilt. Center the narrative. Colonialism is no longer something you analyse. It is something you must confess. Level 4 is the first level that demands you take a stance. And by not taking a stance, you are therefore complicit in the horrible ills of Western expansionist civilization. Level 5. Social enforcement. Colonial apologia must be punished. What does apologia mean? Apologia simply means that you justify why it was a good thing or why it wasn't a bad thing. Level 5 is where we first see consequences for people that don't adopt the narrative. Sanctions appear, reputational damage, academic exclusion. An example of the academic exclusion would be an author like Nigel Biggar, who wrote a book called Colonialism, A Moral Reckoning, where he kind of just laid out the facts, which is that, all in all, colonialism was a net benefit for the world. The world was a better place post-colonialism. Post-British Empire, mainly. In fact, almost entirely. He was a tutor at Oxford University at the time, and the students, of course, were engaging in level 5 virtue signalling on the intensity chart and demanded that he lose his position. Which, of course, these weak institutions that never used to be weak but are weak now because they're engaging in this, they're actually the next one up. They excluded him. Social shaming, we see a lot of that. And of course, a lot of this is going to bleed over into other virtue signalling point system. This one's just for colonialism, but there'll be one for climate change, there'll be one for race baiting, there'll be one for trans. Career pressure, context becomes problematic, nuance becomes violence. How often have we heard that? Words of violence. And so this then is a helpful step up to level 6. Institutional capture. Institutions must correct colonial harm. We see this with land acknowledgement. It's like the laziest thing in the world that you can do. You don't actually, these people, they're so desperate to virtue signal, they don't actually achieve anything with a land acknowledgement. It's like the lowest possible effort required. Colonialism becomes a governing framework, not a topic. Manifestations, DEI doctrine. Because of colonialism, something, 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 minorities, something, 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 therefore white people bad. Curriculum mandates, funding criteria, corporate virtue compliance, HR moral audits. This is where virtue signalling point systems become currency. Whether you believe it or not is an option, but performance is mandatory. In other words, if you want to be a part of these institutions, like Oxford University with our friend Nigel Biggar, if you want to be in those institutions, you've got to be a level 6. You've got to be. But then we get to our level 7s. Totalising moral reality. Colonialism explains everything. All outcomes are traced back to colonialism. Wealth, disparities, political instability, cultural conflict, institutional failure. Everything is a result of colonialism. Something's going on in the Middle East. It's colonialism. I was late for work. Colonialism. Counter-evidence is dismissed as colonial bias. Internalized oppression. Bad faith. History is no longer interpreted, it is rewritten to preserve the moral system. Failure of the theory becomes proof of deeper, hidden colonialism. And so there you have it. Level 1 to 7 of virtue signalling intensity in the virtue signalling point system, where one can earn VSPs, Colonialism Edition. Thanks for watching.